To truly understand why the narcissist can never recover from betraying a super empath, we first have to look closely at what the super empath actually represented within the narcissist's psychological economy. And the reality of this dynamic is far more complex than most people realize. The narcissist, as we know all too well, operates on what is commonly called narcissistic supply. This is external validation that temporarily fills up the internal void where authentic self-worth should be residing. However, not all supply is created equal. There is a distinct hierarchy, a wide spectrum of quality that the narcissist intuitively recognizes, even if they lack the self-awareness to articulate it out loud. Most of the people the narcissist encounters in daily life offer what we might describe as surface supply. This means admiration directed toward their physical appearance, their social status, or their external performance. It is inherently transactional, entirely replaceable, and ultimately hollow at its core. The narcissist consumes this kind of validation very quickly and requires constant, unending replenishment because it does not actually nourish anything real inside them. It is essentially empty calories for a starving psyche. Then, on the other hand, there is the super empath, and what the super empath offers to the dynamic is something categorically different. The super empath does not simply reflect the narcissist's grandiose self-image back to them like a simple mirror. Instead, they actually perceive the real person living underneath the elaborate construct. They perceive the deep wound, the underlying terror, and the fragmented self that the narcissist has spent their entire lifetime defending against. And this is precisely what makes the connection both so intoxicating and so dangerous for the narcissist. The super empath sees all of this vulnerability and still consciously chooses to stay. They still offer genuine compassion, and they still believe in the narcissist's capacity for something more. This creates a type of supply the narcissist has likely never experienced anywhere else in their life. It is validation that feels genuinely real because it is coming from someone with true emotional depth, authentic perception, and the emotional sophistication required to hold complex paradoxes. The super empath can simultaneously look at the narcissist's defended false self and their hidden true self, responding to both with a profound form of radical acceptance. For the narcissist, discovering this dynamic feels like finding cool water after wandering for a lifetime through a barren desert. It is not merely that the super empath makes them feel good about themselves in a superficial way. It is that the super empath makes them feel entirely real, truly seen, and deeply known. And for an individual whose entire psychological structure is built around hiding from being genuinely known by anyone, this experience is simultaneously terrifying and completely irresistible. The super empath also brings several other vital elements to the table. They possess an intellectual and emotional depth that actively challenges the narcissist in unique ways. Unlike typical supply sources who are much easier to manipulate, steer, and control, the super empath engages with the narcissist at a level that truly stimulates them intellectually and emotionally. There are real, substantive conversations, moments of genuine connection, and exchanges that feel meaningful rather than merely performative. The narcissist quickly becomes addicted to this particular quality of interaction in a way that is vastly different from their standard addiction to regular shallow supply. It goes far beyond simply maintaining their grandiose self-image. It becomes about experiencing something that approximates an authentic relationship, even if the narcissist cannot fully participate in it in a balanced, reciprocal manner. But this is precisely where the trap lies. The narcissist is ultimately incapable of metabolizing this high level of supply in a healthy way. They cannot properly integrate it into their psyche. They cannot build anything lasting upon it, nor can they allow it to truly transform them from the inside out. Instead, they simply consume it. They take and take from the super empath's deep well of emotional resources, using those resources to feel momentarily whole and stable. Yet they cannot give anything back of equal value because they do not have healthy access to their own emotional depths. They are continuously drawing water from a well that they themselves cannot ever replenish. And this is the exact point where the ultimate betrayal becomes an inevitability. The narcissist's deep-seated pathology eventually compels them to devalue, undermine, and actively destroy the very thing they are most dependent upon for emotional survival. Perhaps this happens because the sheer intimacy of the connection eventually becomes too threatening to bear. Perhaps it happens because the super empath eventually begins to require basic emotional reciprocity. Or perhaps it happens because the narcissist's underlying shame at being truly known finally becomes completely unbearable. Whatever the specific trigger might be, the narcissist sabotages the relationship in ways that are often spectacular in their sheer cruelty. And then, as a direct result, they lose it all. They lose this unprecedented, one-of-a-kind quality of supply forever. And here is what they discover in the aftermath of their actions. It simply cannot be replaced. The narcissist may eventually find other sources of validation, other people to manipulate, and other relationships to dominate, but they will never again find someone with that exact rare combination of depth, perception, tolerance, and genuine care. They will never again experience the profound feeling of being seen, that completely and accepted anyway. They will never again have access to that extraordinary quality of connection or that high level of intellectual and emotional stimulation. They have successfully destroyed something completely irreplaceable, and on some level, they know it with absolute certainty. Every subsequent relationship they enter becomes a disappointing echo of what they once had and carelessly threw away. Every new source of validation feels remarkably shallow by comparison. They find themselves continuously trying to satisfy a profound hunger that only one specific type of nourishment could ever address. And yet they have permanently cut themselves off from that exact source. You can never truly replace someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway, especially once you have unfortunately proven them entirely right to leave you behind. But the loss of this exceptional supply, devastating as it truly is, points towards something even more psychologically catastrophic for the narcissist. Because what the super empath actually represented was something the narcissist has organized their entire existence around avoiding at all costs, which is being truly known by another human being. Let me explain more clearly what I mean by this fundamental truth. The narcissist's entire psychological architecture is essentially an elaborate defense system built specifically to protect against a core wound, which is a profound, lingering sense of personal defectiveness, deep-seated shame, and fundamental worthlessness that formed early in their psychological development. Everything about the outer narcissistic presentation, including the grandiosity, the perceived superiority, the intense need for control, and the apparent lack of empathy, are not actually true personality traits. They are pieces of armor. They are a heavily guarded fortress constructed carefully to ensure that no one ever gets close enough to see what the narcissist secretly believes is their fundamentally unlovable true self. And this defensive system works reasonably well with most ordinary people. The narcissist can successfully maintain the outer facade, keeping people at the precise safe distance where they provide constant validation without any real penetration, offering plenty of admiration without any actual intimacy. Most people never see past the mask simply because the narcissist never lets them get close enough, or because those individuals lack the perceptual capacity to see straight through the elaborate construction. The super empath, however, is entirely different. The super empath possesses an almost uncanny, natural ability to perceive precisely what is happening beneath the surface layer. They can easily sense the deep wound hiding underneath the loud grandiosity. They can feel the underlying terror hidden beneath the sudden outbursts of rage. They can detect the fragile core resting underneath the apparent strength. And critically, they can hold all of this complex reality in their conscious awareness simultaneously without being easily manipulated by the false self or being destroyed by the narcissist's heavy defenses. This means that for perhaps the very first time in the narcissist's entire life, they find themselves in a relationship with someone who genuinely knows them. Not the performed self, not the carefully curated image, not the strategic presentation, but the actual fractured, terrified, and shame-bound person living underneath it all. And this brings us straight to the central paradox that the narcissist is completely unable to resolve. One part of them desperately wants this experience. One part of them is actively starving for the feeling of being truly seen and accepted anyway, despite all their flaws. This deep longing is the hidden fantasy that drives their initial pursuit of the super empath in the first place. Yet another part of them, which is the part strictly organized around basic psychological survival, finds this intense level of exposure absolutely intolerable. Consequently, throughout the duration of the relationship, the narcissist exists in this excruciating, ongoing double bind. The super empath's clear perception of their true self is simultaneously the thing they crave most in the world and the thing they fear most deeply. It is both the most intimate connection they have ever experienced and the most terrifying threat to their ego. When the relationship finally reaches its end, when the narcissist inevitably betrays this person and drives them away, something irreversible happens to the narcissist's defensive system because they now have to live with the permanent knowledge that someone saw completely through everything all the way down to their core and ultimately chose to walk away anyway. This outcome is fundamentally different from any other relationship endings they have experienced. When a typical, ordinary supply source decides to leave, the narcissist can easily tell themselves a comforting story to protect their ego. They might say that person just could not handle them, or that they simply did not understand them, or that they were not on their proper level. They can tell themselves the person left the performance, but they never truly knew the real person underneath. This convenient narrative allows the narcissist to maintain their fragile defenses completely intact. However, with the super empath, this comforting narrative simply does not work. The narcissist cannot honestly deny that they were truly known. They cannot pretend that the empath just did not understand the situation. They cannot hide behind the lazy excuse that the empath only ever saw the surface level. The super empath saw everything clearly, including the wound, the defense mechanisms, the toxic patterns, and the underlying pathology. And yet, the empath still chose to leave, not out of ignorance, but out of absolute clarity. Not from an inability to handle emotional complexity, but purely from a place of healthy self-respect. This reality completely destabilizes the narcissist's core defensive structure from the inside out. If someone can see you that completely and still choose to walk away from you, what does that terrible truth say about what they actually saw? If the one person who understood you most deeply ultimately concluded that you simply were not worth staying for, how on earth do you defend against the devastating implication that maybe the shameful, defective self you have been hiding all these years really is who you are at your core? The narcissist simply cannot recover from this realization because it is not just a standard loss. It is a profound validation of their absolute deepest fear. It serves as undeniable evidence that being truly known by another person inevitably leads to abandonment. It confirms the exact thing they have organized their entire life around avoiding at all costs. And to make matters even worse, they cannot simply unknow the fact that they have been truly known. They cannot rebuild the internal wall once it has been permanently breached. Every future relationship they attempt to build becomes permanently haunted by the memory of this specific experience. The narcissist now knows intimately what it actually feels like to be truly seen by another human being, which means they always know the stark difference between what they are hiding and what they are presenting to everyone else. They know the exact difference between someone who is easily fooled by the protective mask and someone who can see right through it. And they carry the heavy knowledge that the one single person who saw through it completely still chose to walk away. This dynamic creates a specific kind of psychological scar tissue that never truly heals properly. The narcissist may eventually find new supply, craft brand new relationships, and even temporarily convince themselves that they have fully moved on with their life. But there remains a persistent underlying awareness, often operating entirely on an unconscious level, that they were once fully known and yet fully rejected. They know that someone had complete, unfiltered access to who they actually are underneath the armor and decided that person simply was not enough. And perhaps most painfully of all, the narcissist knows deep down inside, even if they can never bring themselves to admit it out loud, that the super empath's departure was never about cruelty or vindictiveness. It was simply the natural, unavoidable consequence of the narcissist's own destructive actions. The empath did not walk away because they misunderstood the situation or because they simply could not handle the narcissist. They left because they understood everything completely and chose to protect and honor themselves instead. The narcissist can never rebuild what the super empath's deep knowledge and ultimate departure dismantled. There is a comforting illusion that remaining unknown keeps them safe from harm. But let us talk about what happens in the practical, day-to-day reality of the narcissist's life after the super empath finally walks out the door. Because beyond the profound psychological devastation of being fully known and then abandoned, there is something much more immediate and visceral that takes over. The narcissist is now forced to face the one thing they have spent their entire existence trying to avoid, which is themselves. The super empath, you see, was not just providing validation or even a deep, meaningful connection. They were actually functioning as a vital emotional regulator for the narcissist's inner chaos. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by this because it is not the same thing as codependency or enabling behavior, even though it can sometimes look similar on the surface. The truth is that the narcissist's internal world is fundamentally dysregulated. Without a coherent sense of self, without any access to genuine self-worth, and without the capacity for true self-soothing or emotional integration, the narcissist exists in a state of chronic inner instability. They are constantly oscillating wildly between grandiosity and complete collapse, between blind rage and hollow emptiness, and between the terrifying fear of being nothing and the exhausting performance of being everything to everyone. Most people in the narcissist's life simply cannot handle this extreme level of internal chaos. Either they are completely fooled by the grandiose presentation, or they are quickly overwhelmed by the volatility and retreat from the relationship altogether. The super empath, however, possesses an extraordinary and ultimately self-destructive capacity to hold space for all of these contradictions. They remain calm right in the face of the narcissist's blind rage. They provide a steady grounding force when the narcissist begins to spiral, and they offer a stable presence that the narcissist's own fractured psyche is simply incapable of generating on its own. Over time, the narcissist becomes profoundly dependent upon this regulatory function. The super empath quietly becomes the container for all the difficult feelings the narcissist cannot process. They become the steady anchor when the narcissist's sense of self starts to fragment, and the clear mirror that reflects back a coherent identity whenever their own identity threatens to completely dissolve. Because the super empath does this so consistently and so skillfully, the narcissist does not even realize that it is happening behind the scenes. They only know that somehow, simply by being in this person's presence, they feel more real, more stable, and more whole than they ever do anywhere else. Then the empath leaves, and suddenly and catastrophically, that entire regulatory function disappears. Now the narcissist is left completely alone to deal with the full, unfiltered force of their internal chaos. All the heavy feelings they never learned how to process. All the self-fragmentation they never learned how to integrate. All the consuming emptiness they never learned how to fill up from within themselves. It is all still right there waiting for them. Only now there is no one left to help them manage the weight of it. There is no one there to absorb their blind rage without retaliating in kind. No one to witness their hidden vulnerability without trying to weaponize it against them. No one to reflect back a stable, coherent self when they are fracturing into pieces. This experience is entirely different from merely missing someone you used to know. This goes far beyond standard grief or sadness. This is the jarring, painful experience of losing a crucial part of your own psychological functioning, much like losing a limb you never even knew you were dependent upon until the moment it was gone. And here is what makes this reality so devastatingly difficult for the narcissist. They cannot even articulate what it is they have lost. They completely lack the emotional vocabulary and the self-awareness to say that they depended on this person to regulate their nervous system, to contain their toxic projections, and to stabilize their fragile sense of self. Instead, they just experience a hollow void, an unbearable and gnawing absence that nothing in the world seems able to fill. So, they naturally try to fill that void by any means necessary. They hunt for new supply, chase new relationships, and look for new sources of surface validation. But here is the recurring problem they run into. No one else out there has the super empath's unique, rare combination of deep emotional depth, quiet resilience, sharp perceptiveness, and endless tolerance. No one else is capable of performing that vital regulatory function at the same high level. The new supply they find might be attractive, successful, or even genuinely kind, but they completely lack the emotional sophistication required to hold the narcissist's heavy complexity. They are either far too shallow to perceive what the narcissist actually needs underneath the mask, or they are far too mentally healthy to provide it. They set firm boundaries right where the super empath once showed limitless patience. They retreat and protect themselves where the super empath would have chosen to stay and work through it. They demand a fair balance of reciprocity where the super empath gave of themselves unconditionally. And because of this mismatch, the hollow void simply remains. The narcissist keeps searching everywhere for what they lost, but they are looking for something that cannot ever be replicated. They are trying to find someone who will do the impossible, exhausting work of making them feel whole the way the super empath effortlessly did, but that person simply does not exist anywhere out there. Or if a person like that does exist, They are likely another super empath who has already learned the hard way never to sacrifice themselves for someone who is incapable of reciprocating. The narcissist slowly begins to realize on some level that they are completely alone with themselves in a way they have never experienced before. And this stark aloneness is entirely unbearable because the narcissist's true self is not a safe or comforting place to reside. It is a dark place filled with deep shame, hollow emptiness, internal fragmentation, and raw terror. It is precisely what all their grandiosity, manipulation, and desperate need for control were originally designed to escape from in the first place. Without the super empath's steady, regulatory presence to shield them, the narcissist is forced to face the horrifying truth. They do not actually know the first thing about how to be alone with themselves. They never developed the internal capacity for self-soothing, honest self-reflection, or genuine self-compassion. They spent their whole lives outsourcing all of that emotional labor to others, and most specifically to the one person who could handle it at the exact level they required. And now that person is gone from their life, not just physically absent, but permanently and psychologically unavailable to them forever. The super empath has closed the heavy door, set an unbreakable boundary, and reclaimed their own energy. They are no longer willing to serve as the narcissist's emotional regulator, their safe container, or their personal stabilizer. The narcissist is left sitting with the one companion they have spent a lifetime fleeing from, which is their own unintegrated, wounded self. And unlike the super empath, that self offers no comfort, no emotional regulation, and no relief at all, leaving only an echoing emptiness that no amount of new supply can ever hope to fill. Because what is truly missing is not just some external validation. It is the presence of the one single person who could make the narcissist's terrifying inner world feel safe and bearable. The cruelest irony of all is that the narcissist drove away the very person who made them feel less alone with themselves. Yet there is still another dimension to this profound loss that cuts even deeper than the rest. It is something that strikes directly at the very heart of the narcissist's carefully constructed self-narrative. Because the super empath was not just regulating the narcissist's volatile emotions or providing a superior grade of supply, they were serving as living, breathing proof of the narcissist's fundamental goodness. Let me explain more clearly what I mean by this concept. The narcissist lives in a perpetual, exhausting state of what we can call ontological insecurity. This is a deep underlying uncertainty about their own worth, their own lovability, and their basic right to exist in the world. Everything they do, all the loud grandiosity and calculated manipulation, is ultimately an attempt to answer a burning question they can never quite resolve on their own. Am I fundamentally bad, or am I actually special? Most of the relationships the narcissist enters into do not actually help them answer this painful question in a satisfying way. Casual admirers are far too easily fooled by the performance. Their validation always feels hollow because the narcissist knows deep down that those people are only seeing the artificial mask. People whom the narcissist has successfully manipulated or dominated cannot provide any real evidence of goodness either, because the narcissist knows they coerce that devotion through control. Even family members who remain stubbornly loyal often feel like mere social obligations rather than genuine chosen connections. But the super empath was entirely different. This was a person of genuine depth, strong personal integrity, and high emotional sophistication who chose of their own free will, with full awareness of the reality, to love the narcissist. Someone who looked right past the protective mask and still chose to stay. Someone who witnessed the narcissist at their absolute worst moments and still offered deep compassion instead of condemnation.